Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with strawberry rhubarb drop biscuits. That's right, I'm going to show you the easiest technique for making biscuits, which involves us making a biscuit dough and then we drop it like it's not. Since biscuit dough is usually folded and rolled out and then cut into shapes, whereas here we just mix everything up and then spoon or scoop it onto a pan. And not only is this the easiest method, it also produces the lightest and most tender biscuits of all. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we'll do is cut up some rhubarb. And yes, you've been walking by this stuff at the store for all these years and have never bought it. But my hope is this will be the recipe that gets you to finally throw some in your cart. And what we'll do after splitting those ribs in half, and then in half again lengthwise, is we'll simply turn those and slice across every quarter inch or so. And then once we have those cut up, we'll go ahead and transfer those into a bowl. Since we're going to do one very easy optional step that's going to make our strawberry rhubarb biscuits taste better than everybody else's, thanks to a little something we call maceration. So like I said, we'll go ahead and transfer that into a bowl, and then we'll add an equal amount of strawberries that have been cut into about the same size. Okay, maybe a touch bigger on the strawberries. And then to our fruit, we will add a couple spoons of sugar, and we will give that a toss. And eventually we will wrap this and pop it in the fridge, where we will let it macerate, during which time that sugar is going to pull liquid out of the fruit. And not only will the fruit taste better, but instead of having that liquid leak out into our biscuits, by pulling it out ahead of time during the maceration step, we can actually use that as part of the liquid in our dough. So we'll go ahead and wrap that up and pop it in the fridge for about 1 to 2 hours. And while we're waiting for that, we might as well mix up our dry ingredients, which will start with some all-purpose flour, to which we will add some baking powder, as well as its good friend, baking soda, and then we will definitely also need some salt. And that's it. We'll take a whisk and give this a quick mix, just to make sure everything's been equally distributed. And once that's set, assuming it's been an hour, we'll go ahead and grab our fruit, and we'll transfer that into a strainer that's been set over a bowl, so that we can catch all the good stuff. And by good stuff, I mean all those amazing juices pulled from the strawberries and the rhubarb by that sugar. And if everything goes according to plan, we should get at least a couple tablespoons of that stuff. And that's it. We can set that aside for a couple minutes while we make our very simple dough. And the first step for that is to grate some frozen butter into our dry mix. And pro tip, go ahead and freeze your grater also, which will make this fairly easy step even easier. And then the other big tip here is after we grate in about a quarter of the stick, we will stop and grab a fork, and we'll give everything a stir so those pieces of butter get coated with the flour. And we're doing that so they don't all clump back together. Okay, we're taking a big solid thing and turning it into lots of little things. So the last thing we want to have happen is all those little things turning back into a big thing. So make sure you stir this about 3 or 4 times while you grate that in. And that's it. Once our butter's in, we can go ahead and dump in our sugar, which I guess we could add it to the dry ingredients. But fun fact, in baking and pastry work, sugar is considered a wet ingredient. I know, that is weird. But anyway, we'll quickly stir that in, at which point we can dump in our drained strawberries and rhubarb, and we'll give that a quick stir with our fork until it's coated with flour. And once it is, we will stop, and we will pour in our magic elixir, or secret potion, or whatever you want to call those incredible strawberry and rhubarb juices. And then last but not least, we will pour in our ice-cold buttermilk, and we will take a fork and start stirring, and we will keep stirring, and mixing and folding, until those dry ingredients just barely disappear. Okay, this is not a biscuit dough where we have to be super concerned with overmixing, but who has time to keep mixing something that's already mixed? So just as soon as we see all that dry crumbly stuff sort of disappear, we will stop and drop these biscuits. And I know it might look like we used too much fruit, but we didn't. It's going to be the perfect amount, as you will see. And classically, this stuff would be dropped onto this pan with a spoon, but I really do prefer this ice cream scoop because it's going to help us get a uniform size and shape. And besides that, I just find it faster and easier. But anyway, we can go ahead and do that any way we want. I mean, we are, after all, the DOGGs of doing what we please. But no matter what you use, out of this much dough, you should get about 8 to 10 biscuits. And yes, it does bother me they're not perfectly centered on the pan. It bothers me a lot. Oh, and I do recommend using a silk pad here, instead of parchment paper on the pan, since the bottoms of these are going to bake up pretty brown, and they could get a little too brown on the parchment, since we are going to bake these at a pretty high temp. But anyway, once that dough's been dropped onto our pan, we'll go ahead and give these an optional egg wash, which is simply an egg beaten with a couple teaspoons of water. And while you don't have to do this, it really does give our biscuits a beautiful color, and it's also going to help the next ingredient stick onto the surface. Because how I think we want to finish these after they're egg washed is to sprinkle them very generously with some granulated sugar. And I wish I had that fancy large grain type, since that always looks pretty cool. But just good old-fashioned regular white sugar will work, and it certainly did here. And that's it. Once these have been sugared, they are ready to transfer into the center of a 450-degree oven for about 25 minutes, or until they look like this. Oh yeah, those look beautiful, and also very, very close together. And even though I got away with it this time, maybe you should space yours out a little more than I did. And then what we'll do is let these cool for about 5 minutes on the pan before we transfer them to a cooling rack. And you can see here what I was saying about how nicely the bottom's brown, which again is why I like to use this little pat, which provides a little more insulation. But anyway, I went ahead and transferred these on and let them cool, at which point we can eat these as is, and they would be amazing. But to make them a little more amazing, I do like to drizzle a little bit of icing over the top, just for a little bit of extra touch of sweetness. And of course, it also gives them that professional finish look. And by the way, do me a favor, stop buying this stuff in those little tubes at the store, since all this is powdered sugar with a couple teaspoons of lemon juice and some lemon zest stirred in. And the lemon definitely pairs beautifully with these flavors. But when you make icing, you can use any liquid you want. Okay, it can be a little bit of milk or even just water. It really doesn't matter. And that's it. Once iced, I went ahead and grabbed one and went in for a taste, which really was absolutely incredible. Okay, what looked like maybe too much fruit was the perfect amount, and these struck the perfect balance between fruity and moist without being too wet, which would have compromised the texture. And again, the secret here was pulling some of that moisture out of the fruit and using it in the dough. All right, most of these fruit-filled drop biscuit recipes just have you toss the fruit right in, which still sort of works, but you're going to get a certain amount of moisture leaking out while these bake, which I think adversely affects the texture. So here we have the best of both worlds. We get to enjoy those juices without having to mess up the proportions in our dough. And as I mentioned earlier, this is definitely the easiest way to make biscuits, but just so we're all on the same page, these do not have that same flaky texture of a classic Southern biscuit. Okay, a drop biscuit is much more tender and moist, especially ones that have this much fruit in them. And while they're called drop biscuits, I would say the final product's actually closer to a scone, which, by the way, is what our British friends call biscuits anyway. Oh yeah, they call biscuits scones, which is because they can't call them biscuits, because they call cookies biscuits. But anyway, I finished that one, and then piled the rest up in a basket, so I could take some pictures and eat another one, and also show you what this might look like if you brought these to a special occasion brunch, you know, something like Mother's Day. And if you do, while I can't guarantee your mother will be proud of you, I'm fairly certain, at the very least, she will be slightly less disappointed. But whether you do make these for a special occasion, or just some random weekday, I really do hope you give these a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.